Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Gross. Today I'll be presenting my senior thesis or senior project, which is over agribusiness and organizational leadership's role in water conservation. I'd like to start by addressing the issue that the earth is covered in 2/3 of water and not a single drop has increased or decreased in centuries. Now the difference between salt and freshwater levels will depend varying on climate changes as well as human interference. In this presentation, I'll investigate this problem through the lens of agribusiness and organizational leadership. Now, one reason that this is a complex problem is that the amount of fresh water seems to stay the same, although the population continues to rise. Now, using 1976 as a starting point, the world's population was 4.15 billion. Now, 42 years later, it was reported in 2018 that the world's population is now 7.63 billion. That's almost an 85% increase with no increase for water. The second reason why this problem is so complex is that it's a worldwide problem. Every country, even here in the United States, looking at Flint, Michigan, for example, is dealing with having enough fresh water for its citizens. That reason enough causes a need for disciplines to collaborate in order to address. Now, looking at the disciplines of agribusiness and organizational leadership, we begin with the literature research. And according to REBCO, basic to any research effort is the systematic gathering of information about the problem, also known as the literature search. Now, the literature search for this project in particular was not very straightforward as it seems, because both disciplines seem to be subsets of larger disciplines and do not necessarily have the literature studies done specifically for them, agribusiness being a economics subsidy as well as organizational leadership being a sociology subsidy. That being said, agribusiness is a very useful discipline for the study of water because it's absolutely essential for agricultural production. Agribusiness is about helping the farmer be as efficient as possible with his resources so that in turn his profits are as high as can be. If he does not have enough water, his crops will be stunted in growth and not bring as much to the market. Using too much water will kill the crops as well as cause a chemical runoff and not bring any profit. Using too much water or too little water will affect the watersheds of the area the farmer is in. Once the watersheds are affected, other farmers and users of watersheds will begin to feel that impact as well. So it's a fine line that the farmers must use in order to make sure they're in a resource efficiency state. Organizational leadership, in turn, is also a very useful discipline in the study of the water problem because leading the organization of leadership or leading an organization whether small or large is an arduous task. It requires navigating personal and professional relationships in order to achieve a goal. In regards to the different disciplines working together, a goal must be stated to begin with, and many times compromises have to be made in order to achieve said goal. With the water problem, organizations can work together privately or with the government of the country to achieve drinking standards for its citizens. This requires, though, stating what the standards are and each organization being held accountable for developing and achieving these standards. Now, REBCO also states that adequacy must be developed in the disciplines that are relevant to the problem. That means that you must have a working knowledge of the discipline's theories, concepts in order to bring them together for this problem. Now, as we begin to analyze the findings and literature that I found, we'll begin with the agribusiness side. The first source looks at agriculture and water use is from the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation. In this article, the authors use the premise of investigating sedimentation of watersheds and nutrient enrichment. The watershed studies that were used were spread across the country to account for various soil types and weather patterns. After the synthesis of their data, they found that sediment control isn't as large as a problem that was originally believed. The larger problem is in the nutrient runoff. Once the compilation of the lessons were done, the authors also looked at several major reasons as to why watersheds are having increased nutrient enrichment. These reasons are specifically and it's especially important to my study because almost all of them were things that can be reversed. While reversing these factors could also be used in my other discipline in the leadership aspect role. The second source we begin to look at is from the Journal of Development and Change. In this article, Dr. Voss and Bones investigate the growth of international agricultural trade and its effect on watersheds. They use a qualitative research method focused on the areas of Europe and South America from 2011 to 2013. The authors narrowed their research only to agriculture that is being exported. This was done to put a control in place for the water levels looked at. The theory was that aquifers would always have water coming out for everyday use, but with the increased export being done, there would be an increased strain on aquifers and the environmental risk. This article is important to my research because it looks at the areas outside the United States. It also gives an insight as to what other countries are doing in order to maintain their fresh water levels. The third source that we'll be looking at from the agricultural business side is from the Journal of Environmental Management. The authors in this article did not have a stated theory to work with, but did have a thought that farmers are not consistently keeping their best practices over time. The studies that were being part of the research were from 1982 to 2007, and while that wouldn't normally be useful, it does give a look at what changes have been done to promote conservation and production throughout the years. What they found is that often farmers do attempt to conserve the water they use and implement strategies to use water efficiently. Their proposal and conclusion was a two-tiered approach. First, targeting farmers that would implement the strategies, and then using their awareness and networks to nudge other farmers in the proper direction. The final resource and source that I use related to agribusiness comes from the Agricultural Water Management Journal. In this article, the authors used the quantitative research that determined that it's easier to be more efficient with a lower water yield. One section that is very useful to my research is a discussion of managing agricultural water for multiple uses, and how that will raise the productivity of water and thus creating and increasing a more crop per drop. Now, as we look at the organizational leadership side, I'd like to address that while agribusiness requires a labor-intensive style of work, the work of organizational leadership requires a more mental approach and preparation. It can be just as exhaustive and intensive, but in a different way. The first article in organizational leadership comes from the Environmental Science and Policy Journal. This article looks at the scarcity of fresh water in Australia and how 3 different coastal cities, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, are using water governance strategies to keep fresh water levels stable. These 3 cities have a persistent drought issues, and the authors used a qualitative research study of the surveys of water practitioners from all 3 cities. Once the surveys were done, they then used statistics to normalize the surveys and create patterns. The authors found that governance is a matter of continuous learning and making timely decisions. They also proposed a hybrid strategy of government involvement that with private entities for water governance that may be best in keeping water levels sustainable for larger cities. While this may not work for smaller cities that do not have the similar infrastructure, the groundwork has definitely been laid to follow. The second article that I looked at in regards to organizational leadership is from the Determinants of Performance and Community-Based Drinking Water Organizations from the Journal of World Development. In this article, authors looked at the efficiency of drinking water organizations in Costa Rica. In Costa Rica, there are over 1,000 different organizations, many small and many large. And the main section that's useful for this study is that all local authorities of the community-based drinking water organizations are elected by local users. This is because Costa Rica has government subsidies based on the type of community-based water organizations that is in use. The third article that I looked at for organizational leadership investigates how the culture of the leadership in a water utility company, private or public, can affect the success of water safety plans. The author used two different water utility companies, one small, publicly owned one in North America, another large, privately owned in Southeast Asia. The author used surveys of a cross-section of each organization to gather the data and then analyze it to find themes and trends. What the authors found in their conclusion is what is of use for this study, that both utilities attempted to create water safety plans and both failed. The root of this failure for both was communications. The final article in relation to organizational leadership is collaborative approaches to water management planning. And this article was chosen because it gives an insight into watershed management of Darwin, Australia. Now, Darwin is on the opposite end of the continent from Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And this is significant because the Northern Territory of Australia is more abundant in relation to other areas in regards to their resources. This region relies heavily on groundwater resources. The authors investigated how the Northern Territory instituted its water policies and how different organizations collaborated to plan the implementation. They used a literature research approach to their study and looked at past laws and institutional hierarchies. Now, these four articles, paired with the previous four from agribusiness, together bring together the insights needed for this water problem. Now, with all literature research comes conflict, according to Rebco. Conflict is necessary because these conflicts stand in the way of achieving a common ground and thus achieving integration. One conflict that I found comes between the disciplines themselves in the research. Now, the base goal of agribusiness is to increase the efficiency of agricultural producers to in turn increase productivity and profit, as the base goal of organizational leadership is to guide an organization in a proper direction. Now, this proper direction does not always have to be profit. It could be ethical or humanitarian. Essential for creating a common ground between these two is redefining the base goals of each discipline, which will allow them to align a little bit better. Agribusiness could be redefined as increasing agricultural producers' efficiency, and organizational leadership can be redefined as simply guiding the organization. This allows them to line up a little bit more and cross over to each other, where organizational leadership can then be used with agribusiness to lead agricultural producer organizations and individuals to become more efficient in productivity. Now, the end goal for this project was to find some additional solutions to the preservation of fresh water. I do believe that in using the disciplines of agribusiness and organizational leadership, the solutions may be held in the current worldwide organization. Now, an organization like the UN that already has organizational leadership tactics and could also implement the necessary agribusiness strategies on a global level will be one of a good example to use. They already have the infrastructure in place in order to handle the job as well as the resources needed. And at the end of the day, they are a humanitarian organization and have the problem of fresh water being for everyone. This is a humanitarian problem. I hope that this presentation was of help and of interest to you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to take the time to study such a paramount issue as growing, as we're dealing with this in our day-to-day lives, and currently been dealing with this for 5 years up in Flint, Michigan. I hope this helps to bring a light to future generations who are looking to look into solving the issue of freshwater conservation. My name is Christopher Gross. Thank you again for your time.